I was talking about it with one of my kids who was a young kid at the time. And her first question was like, where did the pandemic come from? And it was like, we've just completely erased this moment.
This is Good One. I'm Jesse David Fox, senior writer at Vulture and author of Comedy Book. Is Bo Burnham's Inside the greatest comedy special of the 21st century? When it came out in 2021, a little over a year into the pandemic, it sure felt like it. The magnitude of talent on display from Bo as a comedian, as a musician, and as a filmmaker is monumental. It captured how that time felt for so many people and raised a lot of fascinating philosophical questions about how the internet has transformed our lives. But then, the funniest thing happened. 5 years passed. How people interact with the internet has changed. Bo hasn't commented on Inside or offered any real follow-up. And comedy and culture has moved on. As we approach the anniversary of its release, I invited Kathryn VanArendonk, critic at Vulture, to discuss how our perception of Inside and its legacy has changed, and, to a greater extent, how should we think of COVID-era art in 2026? I'm here with Kathryn VanArendonk. Thank you for joining me.
It is always a pleasure.
So we are approaching the 5-year anniversary of Bo Burnham's Inside, which is a wild amount of time considering. So as we approach that, which I think will be May, why is it worth talking about?
So we spend a lot of time talking about specials that feel like they are either important and unreplicated works of art that are doing something that nobody else is doing, or specials that feel like they are setting some kind of discourse, creating or embodying or focusing conversations that we are having about comedy, about the world, about the nature of art. And Bo Burnham's Inside sort of fascinatingly does both and neither of those things. And it felt like this huge, like monumental moment when it arrived in the middle of COVID. And I think it was something that both you and I looked at as this document that might be able to speak in important ways to how we were feeling about comedy and how the world was feeling about comedy and how the world was feeling about the world. And it did that, but it has also sort of disappeared in culture since then. It is wildly uninfluential in some fascinating ways.
Yeah, I think it was a culmination of a lot of where comedy was going and a lot of the questions comedy was asking itself. And these are comedians, but also like we were asking ourselves as people were writing about comedy. But it's both this sort of culmination of all these ideas and this sort of outlier. And I do think it was sort of so much leaps and bounds beyond where everyone was at in the conversation that it sort of ended all of that, and sort of all comedians were like, actually, we can't do anything even close to that. And because it's so COVID associated, and because Bo has not been around to talk about it, to have other works that are in conversation with it, that it just sort of sits. I think it's like, I don't know, like you think of other specials that were phenomenons like Nanette or whatever. Gatsby has put out multiple specials and people were constantly reckoning with it. A lot of the specials that came afterwards, that was part of the conversation with him. Where that's not really the case with Bo Burnham's Inside, because like a lot of comedians were like, what am I supposed to do with this knowledge? That said, there are only so many pieces of what, let's say, broadly defined stand-up comedy that stand out as like, these are definitive pieces and not just works in the body of a comedian. Like so often when we think of the greatness of comedy, we don't single out specific works for a variety of reasons, partly because so many specials of a comedian will be kind of the same, different themes, but like they look the same, whatever. Where this is a distinct piece, right? That's why it's like, it's like Richard Pryor's Live on the Sunset Strip, Bigger and Blacker, Bring the Pain by Chris Rock. And then this to me is the sort of like special of the 21st century, despite, again, the sort of weird level of influence it has. Though it is sort of an outlier, it was a culmination for a lot of what Bo was working on and a lot of what comedy was wrestling with at the time. Can you talk a little bit about those sort of conversations that we often had?
Yeah. So it felt like we were heading toward this moment where comedians were really wrestling with how to talk about themselves as performers, the role of comedy for themselves as individuals, and how much the art that they were doing needed to be funny, how much the art that they were making needed to be real, and how much reality mattered for how people were consuming whatever they created. And it was also this attempt, it has been this attempt for Bo Burnham and other artists to make art out of their own deep ambiguity about their need to make art. And you see this in a number of other comedians' specials that are sort of coming out around that time. I think particularly of James Acaster and Gerard Carmichael. But it felt like this, because it begins with this piece, this song that is so wry and like deeply cynical about the need to create this thing. And in particular, he's pressing a button that creates a laugh track and then sort of flinching every time it happens, or maybe it's me flinching every time the laugh track happens. And so the whole thing is really framed by, and then we'll get to the end and we'll talk about that. The whole thing is really framed by this painful consciousness of audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, and all these things, if you want to know more about, buy a comedy book by me. But it is the question of, especially Bo was the sort of face of this debate of like, what am I supposed to give the audience? Should I be enjoying this more than the audience should? What is comedy? The idea of what I called post-comedy, and everyone hated it, but essentially the idea of like, if laughter is not as important because we can get laughter so much easier in our life via a variety of things on social media, what does a comedian need to do? And is there different ways in which like a comedian can approach laughter? If you expand beyond stand-up to include sitcoms, quote unquote sitcoms, how many jokes does it need to have to still be a comedy, right? And again, Bo and a lot of people associated with Bo were the sort of face of that. Similarly, it's like the wrestling with the audience, the manipulation of an audience, the thing with, he directed a special with Gerard where they intentionally gave the live audience a bad experience to create a filmed piece. A lot of this also was sort of like, what happens if we treat specials like films? And then as a result, you get this thing that in the narrative where comedy is going, you're like, oh, this is the culmination of special as filmed piece. But now you're like, does this count in the sort of history of stand-up comedy?
It's a very simple question, and I think is actually one of the most useful ones, which is the job of a special to capture a live experience, or is the job of a special to be a special? And this is the kind of most intense articulation of it is to be a special, and to have some kind of live communal experience is not only not the job of this, but it is suspicious of everything that comes with a bunch of people sitting in a room together. And has to be because of the time period in which it was made, but it is also a happy coincidence that the world then created the most intense possible circumstances in which to explore those ideas.
Yes. COVID happening at the time it did is like what you would write a bad play about, right? As like, here's an allegory for our times, it is COVID. But which is why it's interesting to see a piece then detached from it, because we hypothetically are still in the same times. The thing is, it became so associated with what we think of as COVID art.
Yeah.
If there is a Wikipedia page for art made during COVID, it is surely on it. What is it like to watch it now?
I remember sitting and watching it in my house, in like the room where I always was in my home, as I then turned on this piece of art that is about always being in the same room in your home. And it is really bizarre watching it now because at the time it was this thing that you would see him sitting in this space, and as the special goes on, it becomes more and more full of all of the detritus of making this thing, and his beard grows, and of course, what you're seeing is his choice about how to portray the feeling of it, and yet we were all in such a completely bananas mental place that I think watching it was almost difficult to tease apart the way, how disoriented, how sort of dissociative I felt about watching it at the time. I think it was both easier and less striking in some ways to watch it now because I just had enough ability to set my mind apart from the thing that I was seeing. And, artistically, I think it's been several years of discovery of how little we want to be talking about what that period was for most people and how little we want to actually look back on the experience of where that came from. I was talking about it with one of my kids who was a young kid at the time, and her first question was like, where did the pandemic come from? And it was like, we've just completely erased this moment that we all experienced. I think we all understand why, but it is impossible now to look at this thing and not be sort of funneled back to that place.
The thing that struck me watching it now is it's really fun. Mm-hmm. I don't know, the reception of it, which we'll get to, was so intense.
Yeah.
But if you watch this, and especially if you watch the outtakes, you're like, this guy kind of had a blast. And I do think there's so much work that he got to do. Each thing got to be so many problems to solve, and he got to learn how to do a lot of different things. And you see all of these different takes, and he's performing. And obviously it's frustrating because the creative process is frustrating. But it reads much more like, oh, this is a depiction of the creative process and how frustrating it is. But look how much I got to focus on a thing. And that is very different than when you're in the headspace of this. You're like, the long shots of him just sort of staring or looking at his phone hit different.
They sure do. I would maybe not use the word fun, but I think I would say that, I had this reaction at the time because I think I had kids in the middle of COVID, but even more so now, I watch it and I think, this looks luxurious. This looks like a sort of idealized ability to separate yourself from the world and say the most important problem is this thing in my head.
Yeah, 100%.
And I am able to engage with that as like, it has produced this incredible piece of art, but it creates, I think, even more of a sort of mixed frustration in me as I watch it as this, because it is anything that is that luxurious is also so self-obsessed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think that is it's like when COVID started, there were so many tweets about was Shakespeare wrote something during something. I can't remember. That's a piece of COVID art. But let's say Shakespeare wrote whatever during something. And then we look back and then so many people then remembered that, whatever it was. And we're like, I did nothing, or I just learned how to bake bread.
Isaac Newton discovered gravity.
Yeah, and it's like, I think one of the main takeaways during COVID is the people who were productive during it, especially those making art, really benefited from it professionally and also like probably personally. I wrote my book during that time period, and it was really helpful to do. So there's partly that where it's like, oh, like the sort of like construction elements of the special where you're seeing all the camera equipment and whatever does not feel like a burden, where at the time, and I do think like symbolically or semiotically it's supposed to feel like a burden, and we'll get to that, but like it does kind of feel like cool, like you got to buy all this gear. I think I want to talk about the things that don't hold up before we talk about things that do hold up, because I do think one of the failings of it, or things that I think would have made it better is if there were a bunch of boxes. Like, how did that stuff get there?
Yeah.
I think that would have made the point probably a little bit more. Like, if there's a bunch of Amazon boxes.
In retrospect.
Yeah, like, I'm sure he rented a lot of the equipment, but, like, there's some wardrobe that I'm sure he got delivered.
Yeah.
And I do think without it, there is a sort of, like, portrait of like how privileged people spent COVID, which is worthy, right?
Yeah.
That was his experience. But I do think it just sort of rounded out.
Yeah. This is going to date this conversation to a very particular moment in 2026.
Sure, it'll come in 5 days, but yeah.
But it also reminded me of the Adam Friedland episode with Clavicular that I just watched, where this very young person who was stuck in his family's home during COVID used that time to fall into the well of making himself the most beautiful man in the world, and like did not register that as social isolation whatsoever. And like partly that is exactly what Bo Burnham is describing as the problem, like the worst possible endpoint of all of the isolation that he is experiencing. But they're also just the same thing. Like these two pictures are the same.
Part of the interesting thing, as you're saying, the hard thing about watching Special Now is the internet kept on going afterwards. And you watch this and you go, oh, this was 5 years ago or 6 years ago when he filmed it. Because how much the reality that he's commenting upon, and by reality I mean the reality of whatever the internet, is the reality of specifically that time. And though he never says the word COVID, he should have just said the word COVID. Like it's too COVID-y not to be like, oh, this is everlasting. And partly because it's so about post-George Floyd social reckoning and like white people-ness. And like the word that has come about since is like performative male. If there's like a Wikipedia page about like art about performative male and whatever, this is like probably one of the prime examples of that. And so there's a lot of songs that don't hold up because like, oh, the internet's not like that at all. What are the things that sort of felt most of the time for you?
White women's Instagram.
100%.
Is
with a bullet.
And it's so strange because it's not like Instagram no longer does any of those things.
Yeah, white women are still on it.
They are still on it. We are still on it. And we are still posting adorable images of ourselves posed next to miniature pumpkins and our children and our beautiful fall decor. But it is as though that was a battle that we decided either we were going to lose and we didn't care, or the white women's Instagram won and we don't even see that it's a battle anymore. And I think both things are kind of true. And it feels so. Particularly what that song is doing is it's commenting on this Bo Burnham, longstanding Bo Burnham obsession about the ways that we perform ourselves for digital consumption that are so different from the world that we are actually living in. I assume Bo Burnham did not at that time have access to the Be Real app, which then became the thing that everyone was like, see, it's the alternative to this. And that was never actually that big. And it had a very, very short moment comparatively, but it does feel like we've both decided that it's actually just fine to perform ourselves online, and also that as we have moved away from the initial shock of our universal ability to be a public figure, we've also then become increasingly niche so that I don't see the kinds of obnoxious performances that might have once been so infuriating and obnoxious to me, because all I see are the performances that look or are targeted for me now. And we can talk about AI and we can talk about all of the other ways that the internet has shifted what this looks like, but it absolutely feels like an aesthetic and thematic time capsule.
The truth is, the business models of a lot of social media companies changed in the last 5 years, and actually COVID was a big part of it, which is a lot less of it is, let's say, regular people posting their stuff for their friends to see, and it became a lot more people going on their phone and seeing random things geared towards whatever will make you stay on the site longer. The apps became much more geared towards consumption habits and less towards a medium for you to express yourself. And so, yeah, it's still happening, but it just is not what it feels like for most people, I believe, at this point to go on Instagram, where you're like, time to go on Instagram and like perform myself. Now, there obviously are all these influencers, and that's a sort of different thing that now the special still talks about. But it's sort of focus on this sort of like fractured self-quality of digital performance just does not ring true because it is less what we're expected to do because these companies just realize there's more money in people just watching all the time, right? It's like because of COVID, especially, people just wanted to essentially zone out, and these apps figured out how to do that for people. And they became essentially like television.
Yeah.
Like all these sort of essays and whatever about television from like 30 years ago that I'm sure you've read all of kind of sound like stuff you'd write about today, just hyper in a way that was not what a lot of the essays about social media was like 15 years ago, where it was much more sort of performance of self. And now it is
flow.
It's like, yeah.
Flow.
Yeah, and amusing ourselves to death and stuff, right? It's like that's what it feels like. And the special is not really about that, though it can be looked at that way, and we'll get to it. So like there's parts where he talks, and like there's a part where he says, is it necessary that every single person on this planet express every single opinion that they have on every single thing that occurs to them all the time?
Yeah.
And that just, people don't do that anymore. I mean, like, obviously people do that, but not every single person on the planet. It just, there was a time where it did feel like anyone, no matter their job, was expected to sort of like shovel themselves into the content coal mines. And now, in retrospect, that sounds sort of quaint and better than sort of like removing self and just sort of being like awash in like other people's fake lives.
Yeah, the other particularly quaint thing I found was the moment early in the special where he is in black and white and he is being like a brand ambassador saying like, what does Bagel Bites think about the state of the world? Like everyone needs to take a stance. And it feels very innocent because it is this reminder of this moment where it seemed like it might matter if Bagel Bites did or did not take a stance. And what has replaced it is this hyper-consciousness of the exact names of specific billionaires who are actually destroying the world. And I think that's probably a positive change that we are now thinking about who all of these people are. Obviously, he is also engaging with that very specifically in this special. But that moment where we expected brands to treat each other and sort of the rest of the world like they were people is gone.
Yeah, I think that aspect, which was, I don't want to call it this, but this is essentially what now people call it. So it's like you might as well use the words we use, which is like peak woke or whatever. Like a lot of the early parts of the special are reckoning with that in ways that you realize it kind of, though it is intentionally satirizing that entire conversation, it also kind of feels light because that conversation now feels itself so compromised. So it's like white women's Instagram, what's this? Oh, Problematic. Mm-hmm. Problematic feels so just sort of the time and like it is, I mean, it's essentially meant this way, but it does, it is like, is it parroting cancel culture broadly defined, or is it like someone reckoning with that? And I do think that's partly the problem with the song, in that his example of the thing really that he could be canceled for is he dressed like Aladdin one time. And in the outtakes, there actually is what it should have been about, which is like, he just basically says like, I was 16, I made these songs and they were super offensive and I'm embarrassed by them, whatever. And that is like kind of what it needs to be about. But because it's not, you're just sort of like, now it almost plays like a satirization of what sort of hyper vigilant cancel culture was and if you squint and remember, you're like, oh, and that also is because during COVID, there was a sort of knee-jerk quality to it, but it's not really what the song is about because it does not have that.
It doesn't know.
Value of distance. But the things that do hold up, as you're saying, are like the Jeffrey Bezos stuff. Just like saying Jeffrey Bezos' name. It's so funny that like Elon Musk doesn't come out, but you're like, oh, he was a different person 5 years ago, two people. But like Jeffrey Bezos, Sacco, lots of people like to bring up that he said the pedophilic elite or whatever. And I think the song that resonates the most with me, And Forever is sort of funny feeling. It kind of is the entire special. You kind of don't need the rest of the special for a lot of people. Like that kind of, it holds up. It will probably forever hold up. And talks about it's like, it is both an extremely earnest song. It is also presented super ironically. But like what it captures is the feeling of now when our entire lives, we are exposed to so much marketing and advertising and things that are of low quality. And it's just a list of those things. Like it is a comedy piece, but it is not laugh out loud funny. But like if you play that as a regular song, it would be so corny. But he presents it in a way that makes it palatable by being somewhat like amusing in the like fake cricket noises and the fake woodsy background. Like that is partly allows it to be palatable. Otherwise, it would be just like too goofily sincere. What do you think about how does that song resonate with you?
Yes, that song absolutely still resonates. I think the one that sticks with me more is the internet song, which I remembered, and I remembered the chorus of it. And as I was watching this special back, it was one of the only songs where as soon as I hit play, I was like, oh, right, there's the internet song in this one.
Yeah.
And the chorus, which is, are you interested in everything all of the time? A little bit of everything all of the time. It does not matter that the way that people are participating in making content on the internet has changed. The experience of how we consume it, if anything, has only gotten more intense, and it is more dissociative and more disorienting and more upsetting because so much of it now is not even made by people, and it does not even really matter that it's not made by people. And so the thing that he is getting at, the thing that he's describing, that is one of those cases where that song only became more true with every passing year. And it is similarly, I mean, while Funny Feeling is doing that incredibly corny, like trees in the background, campfire, I'm the one college freshman with a guitar aesthetic. The Nightmare Circus aesthetic of the internet song is exactly the same aesthetic that makes sense now. The glasses and the laser lights and the sort of Carnival Barker feeling of turning on your phone and just having this horrific person offer you all of these things. I actually think the tempo of it is really important as well. Funny Feeling almost lets you sit too long with each of those examples because of the nature of that
they're right
musical,
next to each other in the special.
Because of that nature of that musical genre, he has to sing each one of those weird examples lovingly, and you are allowed to process each one of them. And because the other one is this much more rapid tempo, it is able to better replicate the thing that he is actually describing, which is just this wash of nightmare.
And an increasing pace of it, where you're sort of, I mean, it's interesting because like that was that existed before COVID. Yeah, that song. And I do think its freedom from that allows it not to be sort of like caught up in this sort of metaphor that he was trying to make about sort of like we're performing our digital lives and our performance of our digital lives supersedes our real life. And instead, and I think Funny Feeling also does this, which is essentially when you watch it now, the special becomes less about the performance of self and more like creating a prison of your own design. And it's how the internet has given people the tools to create a prison of their own design, right? So it's like, it's not being like the internet companies were like, here's your prison, right? We're not imprisoned by the internet. It's like, here's a bunch of things, and little do you know, you're going to be creating a prison. And so it's like, instead of being in nature, we're going to create technology that will allow you to create a facsimile of it, and that will be your real life. And that's what it feels like, which is essentially like, though you can go outside, you won't. Yeah.
You won't. And the other line from Welcome to the Internet that really struck me this time was early in the song when he is saying like, there's like a list of a couple of things, and then it's like, you know, is there something here that interests you? If not, you'd be the first.
Yeah.
And that really feels yes, you are being given the tools to trap yourself in this place. And I think the experience of that song then also changes the way that you are watching him trap himself. I am able to then watch him in a way that I could not in COVID because we were not being self-trapped. We had chosen to stay inside because we had to. And even that amount of distance now, you can watch him and be like, oh, it's funny that he's chosen to be in this room.
Yeah, I guess in many ways you forget that COVID is the reason he's doing this. You almost have to remember the truth of the reality of this situation, which was this was a thing he decided to make when he has a house that he was surely living in, which gets into sort of larger conversation of like, is it real? Mm-hmm. Is this a true thing that happened? And I do think probably many people forgot this discourse. I did not, because I was sort of very much obsessed with it, and like I spent a lot of time looking at it. It was the only time I was on TikTok was to watch how people decided to react as if this special was 100% earnest. And so a lot of people are calling
earnest, but also
and real and
a documentary.
Yes, calling it a documentary, calling it autofiction, which is interesting because actually what is autofiction is almost all of stand-up comedy normally, and this is like the most fiction actually stand-up has been. And people at different levels, like there are critics who are calling this a documentary, and I've thought a lot about that response, that people were watching this special that, at least at the time to me, was very much about digital performance. We should question digital performance, and we should maybe like touch grass or whatever. Like, though he doesn't say that, right? He's essentially creating a situation where he's trapped. But like, then people responded by being like, I need to respond to this by also digitally performing. And why did that happen? Why did people think that was real? Do you have theories? I mean, like, I guess the first question is like, do you think it was the truth? Like, how real is this to you?
I mean, it's a piece of art. It is only as real as it was real inside his head. And then he created a way of expressing this thing that he was feeling. Yeah. It is real in all of the ways that he was frustrated and was trying to find images and sequences to reflect this thing inside of him. But it was not a camera set up in a corner and then edited carefully to make to be an hour and a half. And I think part of the reason that people's reaction to it was that this was a documentary is that the feeling is so intense. It accomplishes what it wants to, particularly in that moment of saying, I have this thing that actually does feel like the thing you are feeling inside, that you want it to be. It is real. I mean, functionally it is. And it is like we talk about a lot with Bo and also Gerard Carmichael's work, in order to express this thing that is really intense, you have to create some surreal exaggeration. Otherwise, it cannot get at the intensity of the thing.
Yeah, so now I'm going to quote my own book, but the thing I compare it to is Werner Herzog, who's a documentary filmmaker, will just put fake things in his movies. And for him, he came with the idea of the sort of ecstatic truth. What was the thing that Hassan Minhaj said that people got mad at? Emotional truth, right? Which is also what we're talking about. And so what Werner said is that he's after not here is exactly what happened, but sort of a deeper truth that is mysterious and elusive and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization. There is a limit to if you cannot convey feelings with enough if feelings feel so unworldly. So he fabricated those things and he used his real life to intensify that. I think you watch back and you're like, he really is like so bodily in this special. And I think that's part of, again, to try to like make it a more visceral experience. Because I think the thing that when I go back at Bo's work, he'll cite George Carlin a lot. more than a lot of comedians of his era does. And it's partly because he did not see himself as part of the sort of Richard Pryor lineage of like, I'm going to give yourself that. And a lot of the commentary on authenticity and stuff and truth in comedy was a reaction to that, was a reaction to Louis C.K. But also he just like wasn't good at it. Like he was not good at sharing autobiographical details in a way that felt interesting and compelling and greater. So he had this side of him that was the sort of analytical side of him, and he was really good at conveying that. And I think he did want to convey a sort of emotionality that he clearly has. But his way at it could not be through autobiographical storytelling. It is through what he learned through 8th grade, which was like, I, as a filmmaker, can make you what it feels like to be me. I know how to create that by making a movie about this 8th grade girl.
Yeah.
If I made a movie about Bo Burnham, as literally what it is, you would not feel what it feels like to be Bo Burnham. And I think that's what this ultimately is as well.
I do think it is really interesting that the thing that he made and the thing that he was thinking about in 8th grade and his constant effort to, outside of Make Happy, which kind of is its own thing, it is, here's what I'm going to show you how it feels like inside of me. It feels like this is what the world is like, which is actually not him. It is all of these efforts over and over to say, let's talk about what the internet feels like. Let's talk about performance feels like. Not me, performance. Yeah. Let's talk about Jeffrey Bezos. Let's talk about white women's Instagram. Very much not me, but I'm going to like take this. This is what the world feels like. This is what it feels like inside of me. And I keep thinking about Rothaniel and how Gerard Carmichael's Rothaniel is doing, you know, a smaller scale version of a lot of what this is, where he had to create all of these manufactured circumstances to look like a documentary. Yeah. It's not actually snowing. This is not actually one performance inside of a stand-up space. He has edited all these things together. How much of this has he prompted from the audience? All of that stuff is manufactured. But it feels quite different because the thing that he is talking about is, here is who I am inside. Yeah. And so we are able to access that sort of we are trained, we understand how to interpret this kind of fictional way of getting at who someone is because they are trying to say, here is what I am. And I think it gets so much murkier with Bo Burnham's work because every time, other than, again, I think the end of Make Happy. Yeah. Every time he says, here's who I am inside, it's like, the world is this. And you're like, wait, there was a dodge. Are we going to talk about the dodge?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, because it feels this special feels less relevant to what the internet is like for everybody, it does feel a little bit more personal now than it did then for me, because you're like, oh, this is not like what it's like for everybody to perform. It's actually just what it's like for performers to perform, and specifically you. Like, a lot of performers of that, I think, are his friends or his cohort, like, who were playing with the same ideas in the years since, including Gerard, including John Early, including Caperland. All these people were collaborators. All were kind of working towards the same thing. All have basically been like, oh, I will just do it. They all just were like, oh, what if I just don't care and just do it? John Early's like, oh, if I just sing songs, then who cares about the idea of performance? And am I just do the thing? And I think Gerard was the same thing and I think Gerard and Kate are interesting examples because there were true parts of themselves that they were sort of hiding from. That's a lot about what Rothaniel's about. Caperland, similarly, her new work, it is more autobiographical because her life is different and her approach to autobiography is different. Mm-hmm. And in that way, what is interesting is Bo has not been around. Yeah. Who knows what Bo thinks of any of these ideas? Obviously, he made Rothaniel. He directed Rothaniel. He directed Kate, which is a show kind of like breaking through the self-conscious part of yourself, breaking through the sort of anxiety about, oh, am I being pretentious with that? Blah, blah. And it's like, just tell the truth. Mm-hmm. It adds a sort of another layer to the show that I think it's almost like, I don't know how he will continue making work at some point, But how can he continue making work without a way that will reflect upon on this? And I don't know, like, what do you make of the fact that he hasn't been around?
I do think it, as we mentioned at the beginning, has been a significant part of like why the legacy of this special has felt really muffled. But I also, he was around. There was one moment when he was very clearly around because I think, the only person in America who watched all of the Gerard Carmichael reality show, where in the end he is sitting in a theater watching footage of his parents and having a conversation with a completely masked, vocally distorted person who is very clearly Bo Burnham, who is like, why would you put this stuff out there about yourself?
Yeah.
And so I find that to be a little disingenuous.
His like this sort of air of
be there or don't, man.
Got it. Because he still like gives secondary quotes and profiles of his friends and collaborators. He went to the Grammys.
Yeah. Yes. And I completely understand I have been a fan of and a consumer of Bo Burnham's work for many years now, and I completely understand the need to constantly reckon with, like, what is this job doing to me? Should I be a public person?
Yeah.
The flirting with it, I find increasingly juvenile. And I'm very curious. I was also thinking about this special has a song like I'm Turning 30.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious what this looks like, not just like 5 years later in culture, but like 5 years later in aging for him. And I would like to know what it feels like to have had so much of your career be defined by being kind of a precocious youth. And now having the freedom to define who you are in the world, but do you still feel ambiguous, or are you just going to disappear forever? Or what if you just come and just direct a bunch of beautiful other people's things? Or I'm not sure.
I'm sure part of them is like, if I ever talk about Inside, I will now remove people from their experience of it. Like, I do think, as much as I found it odd how people responded to the special at the time, I got it in that it was a huge special at a time where there was not that much content coming out. And these are people who didn't know his other work. Mm-hmm. And these are people who might not. We know exactly where comedy was at the time. We've watched every special, whatever. These are people who maybe kind of didn't watch any. They watched this thing. No one's around them to laugh or not laugh at things. And they're like, this is exactly what my experience is like. Mm-hmm. And so if he comes out and he goes, well, I did this, and I use these lenses for these reasons, blah, blah, blah. Then they're like, what now? This special became a thing for people to hold on to. In probably like his greatest dream of the special is like, can the special be a thing that connects people to each other, which is like a reason to make art. And then it did. So then if he comes out and goes, it literally was this experience, it does sully it. But I do think it is, when you go back and watch his stuff, you're like, this is the work. It's not like it was ambitious and philosophically interesting, but it was like a 20-year-old and a 26-year-old. Like the idea of art is dead is both provocative, but also like a thing a 20-year-old would sing a song about. And this does not feel wise beyond its years. Like, it does feel like the work of a 30-year-old. And in that, he's the wrestling of things. And I do think at this point, what is make some decisions about who you are as an artist. What are the things you want to express? And it might not be like, you don't have to be front-facing. Like, you already made that transition of like, oh, what if I don't make front-facing art? It does feel like the legacy of this special needs to be in conversation with other things that he's creating at this point. Like, because it is, I would say it's like the greatest piece of comedy, hard C comedy or capital C comedy of the 21st century, or the most definitive piece. But if comedy goes in more directions without him, then it's going to be hard to make that argument, because then it'll be instead a relic of the COVID era. Because there's so few, like, I've talked to very few comedians. I think James A. Caster is the only comedian I've talked to who's like, I saw that and I go, I want to also make great work. A lot of people saw it and goes, oh, I can't make anything as good as this, so I'm going to actually make okay work. And I think a lot of the audiences, live audiences, since are like, I just want regular old stand-up. I don't need all these things. So I do think if there's more Bo work at this point, it needs to be about like raising the quality of what we think, what we expect from artists.
Yeah.
Where are you right now on the idea of this is the greatest comedy special of the 21st century? If that is like the fundamental question of like its greatness, do you say yay or nay?
I don't think I would have said nay at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't think I say it now either. And it is as much because of my own affective response to it as it is my love of wrestling with all of the intellectual ideas in it. I love talking about it. I do not, and there are elements of it, there are moments of it where I find the kind of blending of musical aesthetic experience and the sort of technical accomplishment of it and his abilities as an actor, which I think are quite sincere, like real. You feel them. You feel what he is doing. It works. And then in flashes, it feels indulgent. It feels not generous to me. And that's something that I have always wrestled with in the whole Bo Gerard sort of spectrum of that corner of comedy that because it does not care about an audience is deliberately closing the door on the people who are wanting to come in. And I understand the argument that it is able to express and encapsulate so many of these ideas that like no one else is even trying. And it feels great in a iceberg-like way, which is to say, like, you see it, the little bit of at the top, you feel the enormity of it underneath, and you feel cold. And it is difficult for me to then, like, to claim it as this thing that has shaped my experience of comedy in this century.
There's so much paradox in terms of like the things it wrestles with that allows you to have different experiences with over time, with a lot of comedy does not offer.
Yeah.
The concern is because comedy is current in its nature, even as much as the special tries to be slightly less so, it does not say COVID, it is so current in its reflection of the world. I mean, that's part of what's so exciting is like a comedian can do this because they're like, it's all me. I don't need a crew. This is the most extreme example because it's sort of like he's so virtuosic at so many parts of it. It is almost like either he will come back and we'll reckon with it, or at some point, maybe we will reckon with COVID's existence.
Right.
And as a result, it matters more, right? It's like, I mean, in many ways, sadly, probably not. Like, there's all this post 9/11 art, and part of what's exciting about it is sort of like it reckons with 9/11, and like that's the same thing sort of with this.
I will say, as I knew we were going to ask that question and talk about it, and so I was like, well, there must be then another one that you would point to that like is the greatest one. And it's not like I was like, well, clearly it's this other thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it is less about my sense of like, actually there's this other strain of comedy that we should point to as sort of embodying what counts as incredible achievement, and more that the all of the compromises and flaws of this thing, which are so innate, like you cannot take them out. Of course, it was going to be what it was. Make it difficult to say to sort of hold it up as some sort of pristine object.
Yeah, I don't know, but like, does greatness demand a thing hold up? I mean, like it holds up in so much as like it's good. Like even the songs that don't hold up as like social commentary to the present day. You're like, this is good. Like White Woman's Instagram, which does not hold up as social commentary of the day as much. As a piece, you're like, this is the sort of observations are funny. This sort of way it uses aspect ratio to shrink to be the size of a phone screen size, then expand as she describes that her mom dying, but then you realize the performance of her mom's death is also, and then it shrinks again. That is a person with as many skills as a comedian has had using all of them. So that way it holds up. And the reason you don't have other examples is there just isn't that many people that have created like, I'm going to try to do a great piece of art right now. Like it just is not, comedy has not, we've not allowed it, or comedians don't allow themselves that, right? It is a comedian being like, partly because of COVID, like, what happens if I try to use all the energy I have to make something great? And I think, again, I said, like, James A. Caster's current show is the only time since where I felt like a comedian was like, what if I try to do like the bigger swing than like literally people know is a gear comedian should be trying to do.
Yeah. The only other special that did stick in my mind was actually the Safdie-directed Adam Sandler special.
Yeah.
And it is, in a lot of ways, the opposite of this, but it is because it is a comedian, an incredible comedian, who said, I will do the best work I know how to do. You get to take that and do whatever you want with it. And I do think there is something about that I think in its own way is philosophically as thoughtful and sort of pointed toward where we are as a culture. And I love the idea of opening yourself up to sort of whatever a response is. I find that to be a really moving and hysterically funny way of approaching the job of a comedian. I mean, the moment when a dog runs across the stage and he has to deal with the fact that there's a dog there is able to accomplish the kinds of philosophical things that I am looking for in a comedy special while also being a performer who just wants an audience to enjoy themselves.
Assuming he will come back, what would you like to see from Bo next?
It'll be funny if he comes back and then it's like a somehow Palpatine return situation. What I would like is to see him direct again, because it did feel like it was this way of accomplishing the kinds of artistic things. The sort of visual style of his direction is so lovely. It is an aesthetic I personally always resonate with. And it is a way of doing that Sandler thing, right? Of being like, here's my work. I am using it to interpret to like help somebody else's thing come to fruition in what I think is the most artistically meaningful way. And then other people will take it and do whatever and I am as much a part of that equation or not as is meaningful for people.
I mean, I guess to that point, then the argument could be made that Rothaniel is the greatest special of the 21st century because it is both a culmination of what Bo is working on, right? That to us is a culmination of what Bo's working on and what Gerard is working on, which is like, oh, how can we sort of flip this intellectual idea of our relationship to the audience to create an emotional experience and allow people's response to it to be fully emotional and feel like this is the most real, authentic special yet. And people have that experience. And at first I was like, but no, they're doing all these things, right? And it's because I think Bo would agree that Gerard has a special thing to him. Bo, and as a result, was able to showcase it. Gerard does have a special thing to him that on screen looks like that.
Yeah.
He radiates and has the thing that a very short list of comedians have, which is when they're not talking, you think the world is happening inside their head. Where, like, Bo needs to make Inside, which is literally about it, to be like, this is everything in my head. Every single thing is, every detail in my head, and you see it all. Where Gerard can sit quietly and be like, you feel that. And I think you can make an argument that, like, it is both all of that while also feeling like an emotional experience that feels like does not feel out of step with the sort of, you know, I believe Richard Pryor is the greatest comedian of all time because I think you define what comedy is around Richard Pryor, a good stand-up comedy around Richard Pryor, and then as a result, you know what greatness is. And Rothaniel looks more like that than Inside does. And I do think
chest hair and all.
Yeah. I mean, literally, it's meant to do that. He's wearing red. All of it is on purpose. And if you end his story there, in terms of like his relationship to stand-up comedy as an art form, where you go all of his specials, the specials he directed for Gerard, the special he directed for Kate, then Rothaniel, I'd be pretty satisfied being like he's one of the most consequential stand-up comedians that have ever lived in a very, very, very short list. There's a natural progression that a lot of comedians have where when they make a stand-up special so good, they're like, I guess I have to stop doing stand-up forever and make movies. And in many ways, Bo already did that thing. And it's not our responsibility to be Bo Burnham's creativity. And I do think most likely he'll come back and release a movie. But it would be interesting to be like, can you give more to this art form? Like, we feel like in many ways it's sort of tapped out as like an intellectual idea. There has not been this sort of philosophical question that has motivated a lot of stand-up comedy since. And watching Inside, you are struck with like, we kind of need Bo back to ask the questions that we should be asking.
Yeah, I mean, for me, part of the power of Inside as a reflection of a very specific moment is that it was a very specific universal moment. And it feels like we are drifting farther and farther away from the idea of any universal reality that people that exists. And comedy has always been this incredibly subjective thing where it's like, I just get that person or I just don't get that person. I think even earlier than in TV and film and our own algorithms, we were at this place with a stand-up where it was like, that one's for me, that one's not for me, and I understand that. But it does feel like the idea of universality in art, or like whether we can even, not what beyond what is this funny to everyone, is this the world we all see at the same time, is a question that I am sort of looking for in almost any art form that I am encountering. And I think somebody like Bo Burnham might have very interesting ways of not answering, but at least framing. And because he works musically, and music is this art form that I do think people have a biological response to in a way they can't even help. It does feel like he has tools to approach a question like that other people may not have. And I would be really curious to know what that actually would look like from him. But as you say, like, it is not our jobs to dictate what anyone wants to do next. All I can do is talk about my own response to it. And my frustration with Bo Burnham, as always, is like, do you want a response to it? Why are we doing this if there's not an audience watching it? And I think that feeds interestingly into the universality question.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Bo's work up to a certain point, including Inside, it is a critique of the sort of world as it is. And I do think as artists get older, and as he will be whenever he releases something, you do kind of hope an artist can offer a vision of how the world can be or should be. And I think that's what I would look for. It's like, as we are so trapped into our digital lives, whatever, you sort of need visionary people to offer you a vision of like a way to go forward. And it demands us being more humanistic than he has been. But that is sort of where you would need to go. Like, that's the next evolution. Like, we got it. This is the sort of the world as you see it. Like, what is the world you want to live in?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's always a joy.